If you ever make something successful, the first thing you need to do is to capitalise on that and make another, immediately. Sequels are always better than the original product, it's a guaranteed fact. I know it's a pretty big claim, but there's some concrete evidence that supports this point. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, Spider-Man 3, Shrek the Third, and Duke Nukem Forever.
I had a dream about kissing Master Halo from Halo.
Video games are always evolving. Each generation brings experiences both new and old. People want their favourite games to get sequels, to fully develop characters, gameplay, and expand on the foundations laid by the last entry. Listen, if your favourite game of all time is FIFA 12, I have some great news. I know everyone else on this website has already talked about their most wanted sequels, but I got here a bit late and I want to rant about why my games deserve sequels more than anyone else's. When I was doing research for this video, a lot of the same options kept popping up, like Bloodborne 2, Force Unleashed 3, and Metal Gear Solid 6. So I've tried to think outside the box a bit and talk about some games that are a bit more personal to me. Also, it goes without saying, but there will be spoilers for all the games I mention here. If you see something that you don't want to be spoiled, feel free to jump to the next section. So without further ado, let's see what Basic Edition can do for some of these franchises. I've said before that Dragon Ball Raging Blast 2 is my favourite Dragon Ball game of all time, but even I can see that it has some pretty obvious flaws. The lack of a true story mode, repetitive fighting mechanics, and lacklustre stage design really stopped this game from being a huge fan favourite. While the game was flawed, it did have some pretty good aspects, like the varied character roster, a great soundtrack which fair enough was removed due to the scandal surrounding Kenji Yamamoto, and high quality character models. With the right developer at the helm, I think Raging Blast 3 has the potential to be one of the greatest Dragon Ball games of all time. Give it a story mode that goes through the original story like the Budokai Tenkaichi games or Kakarot, or go even further and make an entirely original story like Fighters did. The original developer of the Raging Blast series, Spike, now known as Spike Chunsoft, hasn't worked on the series since 2011, so it could be a good idea to hand it over to another talented developer with more recent experience, like CyberConnect 2. I think they did a really good job with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, and their previous experience developing anime fighting games like the Naruto Storm games and the Demon Slayer game would make them the perfect fit for Raging Blast 3. INSOMNIAC Games is one of my favourite developers of all time, and they have quite the history to look back on. Having developed games like the Ratchet & Clank series, the original Spyro Trilogy, and Marvel's Spider-Man games, INSOMNIAC is a developer that has time and time again proven that they know what they're doing. They've primarily been a developer for PlayStation consoles, but back in 2014, infidelity was all the rage, as INSOMNIAC worked with Microsoft to create an Xbox One exclusive title, Sunset Overdrive. The way I've described Sunset Overdrive to friends is Ratchet & Clank on LSD. It's a third-person shooter where you try to survive the apocalypse caused by an evil energy drink company, Fizzco. You tear your way through hordes of mutants using some of the most ridiculous weapons you've ever seen, like the gun that shoots exploding teddy bears, the gun that launches bowling balls, and the flaming compensator, a shotgun with testicles. Sunset Overdrive had a great traversal system that used air dashes and grind rails to build and keep momentum while gunning down hordes of OD. The writing was great and the world was goofy. It had you doing shit like bouncing on incinerator pads to cook pigeons, and fighting a giant blimp of Fizzco's mascot, Fizzy. I hope the franchise doesn't get left on the shelf. INSOMNIAC owns the rights to the IP, so if a sequel does get developed, chances are that it will come to PlayStation first or as a potential exclusive. Pokémon X and Y were the main series foray into the third dimension. Set in the Kalos region, you'd battle gym leaders, complete the Pokédex, take down a national crime syndicate, and prevent the destruction of the region. You know, the usual. While X and Y introduced some great features like Mega Evolution and Pokémon Ami, a lot of people found them to be a bit underwhelming compared to previous titles. When compared to the previous 5 generations of Pokémon, Generation 6 felt lacking in content. Generations 1 to 5 had introduced between 100 and 156 Pokémon each, a mean average of 130 per generation. Pokémon X and Y only introduced 72 new Pokémon. Alongside the lack of new introductions, the games were too easy, the post-game was nearly non-existent, Mega Evolution was barely used despite it being the fancy new gimmick, and the closest thing we got to a Battle Frontier was the Battle Maison. In recent years there have been several leaks concerning old Pokémon games, such as the beta leaks of Generations 1, 2 and 4. Back in 2020, there was a leak of a file detailing past and planned main series entries, all the way from Ruby and Sapphire to Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. And there were 2 entries here that caught everyone's attention: Kalos Reserve 1 and Kalos Reserve 2. These titles suggest that Game Freak were planning on making X and Y sequels, but the games were eventually scrapped. It's a real shame, because I think Kalos sequels could do a lot to improve upon the originals. They could make the game harder by giving gym leaders in the Elite Four better teams and access to Mega Evolution. We could find out what happened to AZ after the final battle. There could be an actual storyline involving Zygarde instead of just being given a cube and a fetch quest in Generation 7. and a storyline involving this generation's mythical Pokemon, Diantha, Hooper and Volcanion, would be really cool instead of just getting them through mystery gift codes. I think X and Y sequels have a lot of potential and they do right by fans of Kalos. Naruto is one of my favourite series of all time, and when Ultimate Ninja Storm 4 came out back in 2016, I was blown away. The game looked incredible and it was a brilliant retelling of the war arc. No matter how you feel about the story of the war arc, you have to admit that it was done perfectly by Storm 4. Since then, there was some DLC including post-game content and new characters including the Sound Forums and Boruto editions. And then there was Road to Boruto, a story DLC that covered the new Boruto movie. It's been 7 years since Storm 4, and no other Naruto game has really appealed to me. I'd love to see a new Storm game that covers things we haven't seen from the games yet, like the novels about characters like Sasuke, Shikamaru, Kakashi and Itachi, the continuation of the Boruto story. Look, I'm not a fan either, but I think CyberConnect 2 could do a better job of adapting the manga than the anime has.
This sucks.
And just imagine that Baryon mode scene as a QuickTime event. While I would like a comprehensive Naruto game with the entire story covered by one game, I'd be happy to get a game that went through the aspects of the story that the games haven't done yet. Throw in the character novels, the current state of Boruto, maybe some side stories approved by Kishimoto, and the movies would also be a fun inclusion. I think it'd be a nice return to form for CC2 and the community would love another Storm game. After the hot mess that was the Avengers game, I was pretty hesitant when Square announced that they were releasing another Marvel game a year later. But I was wrong to be skeptical, because Guardians of the Galaxy was a brilliant game from start to finish. The game sees you take control of Star-Lord and command the Guardians to do specific moves in combat to build combos and increase damage. The combat flows really well and the system makes you feel like a proper team. The game had a story that didn't necessarily rely on the hype built by the MCU, and it introduced characters that a lot of people, including myself, were unfamiliar with. It was a great experience and I really want to see where the developers will take this next. The first game saw us take on threats like Lady Hellbender, the Church and Magus. I'm interested to see who we'll take on next and whether the choices we made in the first game would have an impact on the events of the sequel. The Spider-Man games by INSOMNIAC are incredible, and it's about time that the rest of the Marvel games followed this trend. Guardians was good, but a sequel could give these characters so much more to do. Don't crucify me for saying this, but I don't hate knack. I know. The thing is, I remember when the PS4 first came out. It was the first time I'd seen a brand new console generation launch while I was interested in the industry. After school every day, me and my friends would go to Game, which is a video game shop in the UK, and they had a PS4 display cabinet. I played either the Knack or Octodad demo every day after school until I could afford a PS4, and when I finally got one, I got a copy of Knack with it. I know that Knack had a ton of problems. It was a bare-bones platformer with boring combat and the characters and storyline were terrible. But somehow, Knack 2 released 4 years later and actually addressed a lot of the original game's issues. It had a better combat system, tighter platforming sections, and a variety of enemies to take on. But the characters were still pretty bland, and the story definitely wasn't anything to write home about. I think a third game would give Knack one last time to shine. This one is probably the most unlikely on the list. I just wanted to include Knack in at least one video. And I think Knack 3 is the one game that would make Donkey truly happy. When it comes to Bully, I think fans would be happy with either a remake of the original game on modern consoles or a full-blown sequel. I only just played Bully last year, but I really enjoyed it, despite the technical problems that came with the Scholarship Edition. It's been quite some time since we've seen anything big from Rockstar that isn't Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption, so a new entry in the Bully series would be a nice change of pace. Plus, there's been no shortage of rumours when it comes to this game. It all started with a 2009 interview in which Sean Lee, the original composer of Bully, said this. There was also some concept art leaked in mid-2017, but Rockstar never commented on it, so we still don't know if it's fully legit. I think a sequel to Bully following Jimmy through his college years would be really cool, or maybe even a new kid attending Bullworth Academy in the current day, who hears about Jimmy Hopkins as a legend. Considering Rockstar's focus has mainly been on putting GTA 5 on every platform known to man and adding to Red Dead Online, some of its neglected franchises could do with some love. Naughty Dog is a developer that's held in very high regard. They've developed absolute gems like the original Crash Bandicoot trilogy along with Crash Team Racing, the Uncharted game, and obviously the elephant in the room, Keith the Thief. But filling the gap between Crash Bandicoot and Nathan Drake on the spectrum of video game mammal evolution is a fella called Jak. Jak and Daxter is a series of games developed by Naughty Dog for the PS2 back in the early 2000s. When it comes to PlayStation platforming icons, they've all had their own success beyond their original console generation. Crash and Spyro had their remake trilogies, as well as a slew of games of varying quality between the originals and the remakes. Sly Cooper had Thieves in Time in 2013, Ratchet & Clank have been getting games way beyond the original trilogy, and Sackboy is off doing a ton of shit like mobile games, racing games, and a platformer on the PS5. Jak and Daxter haven't seen any kind of release since The Last Frontier on PS2 and PSP in 2009. They've had collections released since then, but that's about it. There is a sliver of hope for the franchise, since Jak and Daxter had a cameo in Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart in 2021, but there were a ton of other PlayStation Easter eggs, so it's a bit flimsy. Who knows? Maybe Naughty Dog wants to give Jak and Daxter another chance if they're not too busy remaking the next remake of The Last of Us. Back at E3 in 2016, we got a beautiful announcement.
We're going to bring back the original Crash, Crash 2, and Crash Warped, fully remastered from the ground up for PlayStation 4.
As someone who played a ton of Crash 2 on the original PlayStation, I was really excited for the remakes. The Crash Bandicoot N.Sane trilogy released in 2017, and just 1 year later, we got the Spyro Reignited trilogy. Both collections were received well by both old fans and brand new players. Then in 2019, we got a remake of Crash Team Racing. In 2020, we got a new Crash game. Then in 2021, we got Crash on the Run, an endless runner game for mobile devices. And in 2022, we got a trailer for the upcoming game, Crash Team Rumble. You see where I'm coming from here? We haven't had anything from Spyro for the past 4 years, and I'm starting to feel bad. Especially with all the stuff Crash has gotten since his revival just a year prior to Spyro's. Both characters went through rough years, and they both served their time in Skylanders, so I don't see why Spyro isn't getting the same kind of treatment. A new game in a similar vein to It's About Time would be welcomed by fans with open arms. I'm not even that much of a Spyro fan, and yet I still think it's unfair that he's been left in the dust in recent years. There's a very common saying within the Final Fantasy community, and that is, your first Final Fantasy game is usually your favourite. It's not true for everyone, but it's definitely true for me. And yeah, my favourite's Final Fantasy 15, hate me all you want. The more you think I'm wrong, the more I'm gonna love the game. Final Fantasy 15 saw you follow Noctis and his friends through a journey that transformed from a road trip to Noctis' wedding to a quest to reclaim the throne of INSOMNIAC after an attack by a hostile nation and the assassination of Noctis' father, King Regis. The game does have a really good ending, but there were several DLC episodes released containing story aspects that we never got to see, such as Gladio testing his strength against Gilgamesh after his frustrating confrontation with Ravus, Prompto learning of his true origin after being thrown off the train, the actions of Ignis during the assault on Altissia and the Leviathan's rampage, and Ardyn's origin along with the reason he sought vengeance on the Somnus bloodline. These all have a good amount of content, and they tell the player a lot more about what happened to the characters during their absence from the story. But there were more episodes planned revolving around Aranea, Lunafreya, and Noctis. Rumours were that these would spin off into an alternate ending of the main game. Considering the amount of content lost here and the potential for stories to come from other places within the world of Final Fantasy 15, I think a second installment could be really well received. Either implement the lost content from the scrap DLC episodes, or maybe make a game about how the party rebuilds Insomnia after the 10 years of darkness and the challenges that come with that. Who takes the throne and rules in this new time? What happened to all of the surrounding towns? And is there a bigger Adamantoise? I know that this is definitely a more personal pick than the rest, and it's definitely not as big on some people's lists. I just wanted to include it anyway, because I think Final Fantasy 15-2 has a lot of potential and it'd piss off a lot of the fanbase. Now, I never actually played ARMS when it first came out. I didn't get a Switch until 2019, but I always really liked the concept. The first trailer is what really sold me on the game. The main complaint about ARMS was the lack of content when the game launched, which is becoming a bit of a trend with Nintendo games at the moment. The first game had well-designed characters, an interesting battle system, and a fun concept. I think a sequel will be able to fully capitalise on all these factors. Add in an actual story mode other than the Grand Prix, flesh out the world a bit more, add more game modes, new characters, and you have a pretty decent follow-up. And maybe make the new game rely less on the motion controls of the Joy-Cons, since they aren't as responsive as the Wiimotes were. Maybe do what Skyward Sword HD did, give players the option of using motion controls or button controls, make them fully customizable like Smash Ultimate does. That way players can control the game exactly the way they like it. Also, I don't see a new Punch-Out coming anytime soon, which is a real shame, but I would really like to see Little Mac included in this. Just have him as a secret boss character, kind of like how Donkey Kong was the final opponent in Punch-Out on the Wii. Just a nice little nod to let fans know that Little Mac is alive. Please, just anything. I know that everyone's go-to Mario sequel is either Galaxy 3, Sunshine 2, or 4D World, but mine has to be Odyssey 2. It was one of the first games I got for my Switch back in 2019, and I loved every minute of it. Odyssey was my first 3D Mario game, and up until that point, I'd never had a game make me smile as much as the song sequence in New Donk City. From my perspective, which is that of a pretty casual Mario fan, I struggled to think of what really needed to be improved in Odyssey 1. The movement system flowed brilliantly, the story was pretty run-of-the-mill, but the journey was fun. I loved going through the different kingdoms, fighting all of the bosses, capturing different creatures, and collecting moons. Honestly, if Odyssey 2 was to come out, I just want it to be more of the original game. Maybe add in some new kingdoms that reference other games in the series like Galaxy and Sunshine, some more unique bosses. There was a good lineup in Odyssey, but I think the fights against the Brutals did get a bit boring. A brand new story, and another song, because Jump Up Superstar was such a good time. Last year, I made a video about why Persona 5 Royal is brilliant and why you should play it. It's by far my favourite video I've ever made up until this point, and it's my favourite video game of all time. I still need to go back and play the other games in the series, which I can do a lot more easily now thanks to the parts of Persona 3 Portable and Persona 4 Golden that came out earlier this year. Just a side note, I'd be much more inclined to buy them if there were some physical releases. Please Atlus, I'm begging you. Last year, Persona 5 Royal was ported to 5 new platforms and sold over 1 million units within the first month. With this success, I'm sure that Atlus has Persona 6 in the works right now. I adored the character writing, presentation and gameplay of Persona 5 Royal, and I have no doubt that Persona 6 would improve on everything I've mentioned and more. If I did get a say in what to include in Persona 6, which I naturally should because I shout about games on the internet, I'd like to see a setting other than high school. I've seen a lot of people suggest university, and I agree that it would be a nice change. It gives you more freedom to manage your time as you please, which is something I really enjoyed about Royal. And it has the potential to introduce a much more diverse cast of characters. And characters would be moving to university from other parts of the country and other countries altogether. And I'm surprised I'm saying this, but make the game even longer. I spent 110 hours in Persona 5 Royal, and while I did enjoy the experience, I felt kind of empty when it ended. Just extend the game so I don't have to think about my real life and responsibilities, please. Every night, there's a voice that haunts my dreams.
It is 4 times the size of Fallout 4.
I wake up in a cold sweat, his words still echoing in my mind.
It allows us to have 16 times the detail.
That's right, this entry is dedicated to Skyrim 2, now with more Rim. But in all seriousness, I know that the Elder Scrolls 6 is happening, but dear God, can we please just have a confirmation of life from Bethesda? All we've had is the announcement teaser, and that was nearly 5 years ago now. I know they're working really hard on their other games like Starfield and Redfall, but I'd be happy with just a crumb. Also, I'm really surprised they haven't brought Skyrim to mobile devices yet. I know you can technically already play it on mobile through the Xbox Game Pass app, but I wouldn't be surprised if Bethesda found a way to put it on the iOS and Google Play stores and still charge full price. Come on, Todd, you know you want to.